While the whole world was watching missiles fly toward Israel, something was happening that almost no government wanted you to know about. Saudi Arabia was secretly bombing Iran. The UAE was secretly bombing Iran. And Iran, in response, was firing more missiles and drones at Dubai and Abu Dhabi than it was firing at Tel Aviv. Not a rumor, not speculation. Confirmed now by the Wall Street Journal, by Reuters, by two separate Western intelligence officials who have gone on record. The Gulf states entered this war, quietly, deniably, and with devastating effect. And Iran's retaliation on those Gulf states has been the most underreported military story of the entire conflict.
Here is the number that should stop you cold. Iran directed approximately 83% of its total missile and drone strikes not at Israel, but at the 6 Gulf Cooperation Council states. The UAE alone absorbed more Iranian attacks than Israel did, more than 537 ballistic missiles, more than 2,256 drone strikes. An Amazon data center in Abu Dhabi was hit and caught fire. Dubai airport was disrupted. The Jebel Ali port, the largest port in the Middle East, took debris hits from Iranian intercept fallout. Smoke was rising over Sharjah and Fujairah, while the news cameras were all pointed at Tel Aviv. This is Battlefield Brief, and today we are going to give you the story that explains why the Gulf will never be the same again. We cover real military events and geopolitical flashpoints with straight analysis and zero spin. Hit that like button right now and subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of story that mainstream coverage buries under headlines about Israel, while the actual strategic earthquake happens somewhere else entirely. Thousands of people tune in here every week because we do not sugarcoat anything. And today, the truth about what the Gulf states did and what Iran did back to them is going to fundamentally change how you understand this war. Let's go. To understand why the Gulf states are now secretly at war with Iran, you have to understand what those states thought they had built over the past several years. After watching Iran attack Saudi oil infrastructure in 2019 and getting essentially no American response, both Riyadh and Abu Dhabi made a calculation. They could not rely on Washington unconditionally. So they pursued quiet diplomacy with Tehran, gentlemen's agreements, back-channel détentes. Saudi Arabia and Iran even restored diplomatic relations in 2023, brokered by China. The UAE similarly pulled back from confrontation and reached its own quiet understanding with Tehran. The strategy was simple. Don't poke the bear, don't take sides too loudly, and protect your economy and your people. That strategy died on February 28, 2026, the day the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. Within 48 hours of those first strikes on Iran, Tehran had already fired more than 150 missiles and 500 drones at the UAE alone, not at American bases, at the UAE itself, at civilian airports, at hotels, at oil infrastructure, at the port that handles a quarter of the region's trade. Every quiet deal the UAE had made with Iran was exposed as worthless the moment Iran needed a target and saw the Emirates were hosting American military assets. The Gulf air defenses were largely effective against Iranian missiles, helping prevent catastrophic damage, but Iranian drones proved much harder to repel. What that means in real terms is this: some things got through. Debris from intercepts rained down on populated areas. Fires broke out. An AWS data center in Abu Dhabi was struck and caught fire, causing power outages. The Jebel Ali port took hits from aerial intercept debris. Dubai, a city of 4 million people, the financial capital of the entire Middle East, a place that markets itself to the world as an oasis of stability and safety, was being hit by Iranian weapons. The UAE ambassador to the United States, Yusuf Al-Otaiba, rejected a ceasefire as not enough and called on the U.S. to achieve a conclusive outcome against Iran, addressing Iran's full range of threats: nuclear capabilities, missiles, drones, terror proxies, and blockades of international sea lanes. According to diplomats, the UAE emerged as the most hawkish of the Gulf states and pushed Trump to launch a ground invasion of Iran. Read that again. The UAE, a country that 6 months ago was maintaining quiet diplomatic backchannels with Tehran, was pushing Trump for a ground invasion. That is not a small shift in position. That is a complete and total strategic reversal, driven by existential fear.
Now here is the part that nobody was supposed to find out about. Not yet. Possibly ever. The United Arab Emirates carried out a secret military strike against Iran's Lavan Island oil refinery in the Persian Gulf in early April. The strike sparked a major fire and knocked much of the facility's capacity offline for months. Iran described the blast at the time as an enemy attack and responded with a barrage of missile and drone strikes against the UAE and Kuwait. The UAE did not claim it. Iran did not name them publicly. Both sides maintained what analysts are calling strategic ambiguity, each knowing what the other had done, neither willing to say it out loud, because saying it out loud forces escalation that neither side fully controls. Gregory Brew of the Eurasia Group wrote, "Not sure which is more interesting, that the UAE repeatedly struck Iran, or that they did so without attribution, reciprocated by Iran."
Saudi Arabia did the same. The Saudi Air Force conducted strikes on Iran in late March, assessed as tit-for-tat retaliation after the kingdom itself came under attack. 2 separate Western officials confirmed this to Reuters. Saudi Arabia officially said nothing. Its foreign ministry issued a statement reaffirming its position on de-escalation and self-restraint, and then its Air Force quietly flew missions into Iran. Here at Battlefield Brief, we want you to understand exactly what this means strategically, because it is genuinely historic. Saudi Arabia and Iran have been regional rivals for decades. They have funded opposing sides in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. They have traded accusations, expelled diplomats, severed relations, and restored them. But Saudi Arabia has never, in living memory, conducted direct offensive military strikes on Iranian territory. What happened in late March 2026 was the first time the Saudi Air Force attacked Iran. Quietly, deniably, without a press conference. That is not just a military event, that is a tectonic shift in the regional order that will shape Middle Eastern geopolitics for a generation. The attacks on the UAE disrupted air traffic, tourism, and real estate in the Emirates, and triggered layoffs, prompting what Gulf officials describe as a fundamental shift in Abu Dhabi's strategic outlook. The UAE now views Iran as a rogue actor, threatening its economic model and internal stability.
Now, let us talk about why Iran made the targeting decisions it made, because this is where the strategic picture gets genuinely complex, and most coverage completely misses it. Iran did not fire 83% of its strikes at Gulf states by accident. This was a calculated decision, rooted in cold strategic logic. Iran understood several things simultaneously. First, Israel had already been hit hard in the 12-day war of June 2025. Israel's air defenses, while powerful, were already under strain and operating in a conflict they had been fighting for years. Iran had already probed those defenses extensively. Second, and crucially, the Gulf states were the soft underbelly of American power projection in the region. Every U.S. military base, from Al Udeid in Qatar to Al Dhafra in the UAE to the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, depends on Gulf state cooperation, Gulf state airspace, Gulf state ports, and logistics. If Iran could make the Gulf states feel the pain of hosting American forces, if it could force them to question whether American protection was worth the cost, it would erode the entire military foundation that Washington had built in the region over 40 years.
Third, Iran calculated that targeting Gulf economic infrastructure sent a message to the entire global economy. Dubai is not just a city. It is the financial hub for hundreds of billions of dollars in trade, investment, and financial flows across the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. When smoke rises over Dubai,
when airport departures get canceled, when an Amazon data center goes dark. That is news that reaches every boardroom and every finance ministry on Earth in minutes. It creates economic pressure on the United States and its allies that military pressure alone cannot match. Iran retaliated by targeting Gulf Cooperation Council countries with about 83% of its total missile and drone strikes during the war, with the UAE receiving the most attacks out of any country, including Israel. That is not a miscalculation. That is a doctrine. Iran deliberately chose to make the Gulf bleed because it understood that bleeding the Gulf bleeds the global economy and forces political pressure on Washington from allies who are watching their oil infrastructure and their cities take damage.
President Trump has warned that the ceasefire with Iran is on life support, raising fears that the 10-week-old conflict could intensify after a brief, fragile pause. Here is why it is on life support. The ceasefire announced on April 8th solved none of the underlying problems that started this war. Iran's nuclear program, damaged but not destroyed. The Strait of Hormuz, still effectively closed, still strangling the global economy. Iran's new leadership, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the supreme leader killed in the opening strikes, is not a man with incentives toward moderation. He inherited a wounded, humiliated regime and a domestic audience that has suffered tens of thousands of casualties.
Trump stated on Truth Social that if a deal was not reached soon and the Strait of Hormuz reopened, the U.S. would destroy all of Iran's power plants, oil wells, Karg Island, and possibly all its desalination plants. These are not the words of a negotiation going smoothly. Meanwhile, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, now secret combatants in this war, have their own demands that go beyond what the U.S.-Iran bilateral track is discussing. The UAE ambassador explicitly called for addressing Iran's full range of threats: nuclear, missile, drone, proxy, and maritime blockade capabilities. That is a maximalist demand. That is not a country that is going to accept a deal that leaves Iran with any meaningful offensive capability pointed at the Gulf. If Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, this gives it a new financial lifeline in the form of tolls that could total $50 billion per year. And 80 to 95% of those tolls would likely be paid by the Gulf states, cutting directly into their oil revenue. So from the Gulf's perspective, a ceasefire that leaves Iran in control of Hormuz is not peace. It is economic surrender.
Here at Battlefield Brief, we always look past the immediate event to the larger pattern. And the larger pattern here is this: the Gulf as you knew it is gone. The era of Gulf Arab states maintaining studied neutrality, balancing between Washington and Tehran, keeping economic ties with China while relying on American military guarantees, avoiding direct military confrontation, that era ended on February 28, 2026. The shock from the war and worries over future strikes threaten the sense of security, prosperity, and opportunity that Saudi Arabia and the UAE in particular have spent years and billions of dollars cultivating. Dubai built its entire identity on being a safe, stable, open, neutral global hub. That identity has taken a serious hit. Every multinational corporation, every sovereign wealth fund, every airline hub planner who watched smoke rise over Sharjah and Dubai in March 2026 is now asking questions about risk that they were not asking before. And those questions have consequences for investment, for business location decisions, for the trillions of dollars in capital that flow through the Gulf every year.
For the United States, the secret involvement of Saudi Arabia and the UAE is both an asset and a complication. An asset, because it means Washington is not alone in this fight. A complication, because both countries now have their own war aims, their own red lines, and their own domestic political pressures. And those may not perfectly align with what Washington needs to close a deal with Iran. For Iran, the revelation that both Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been secretly striking its territory changes the negotiating equation fundamentally. Iran can no longer treat this as a bilateral confrontation with the US and Israel while maintaining any relationship with the Gulf states.
The Gulf has chosen a side, and Iran knows it. The next few weeks in the ceasefire negotiations are going to tell us everything about whether this conflict has a diplomatic off-ramp or whether it is heading toward another round of strikes. Battlefield Brief will be watching every development closely, because what happens between Washington, Tehran, Riyadh, and Abu Dhabi in the coming months will determine whether the global economy gets its oil supply back, and whether the Gulf emerges from this war as a more stable region, or a permanently militarized one.
The story of this war is not just about Iran and Israel. It never was. The story is about whether the entire architecture of Middle Eastern security, built over 40 years of American military presence, Gulf Arab hedging, and Iranian proxy warfare, survives what happened in February 2026. Right now, the honest answer is nobody knows. What we do know is that Saudi Arabia bombed Iran, the UAE bombed Iran, Iran bombed Dubai, and a ceasefire that Trump himself is calling on life support is the only thing standing between the world and another round of escalation that would put global oil supplies in serious jeopardy. Drop a comment below right now and tell us, do you think the Gulf states made the right call going on the offensive against Iran? Or did they just make themselves permanent targets? We read every single comment, and your perspective shapes how we cover this story going forward. Share this video with someone who thinks this war is just about Iran and Israel, because the Gulf dimension is the part that directly affects every person on Earth who pays for energy, buys goods, or cares about whether the global economy holds together. Hit the like button if this gave you the real picture. Subscribe if you are not already here. Stay sharp, stay informed. We will see you in the next.